Hi, this is Dr. Mark Hyman. Could food addiction explain why 70% of Americans are overweight? Well, let's explore how that might be true. Our government and our food industry both encourage us to take more responsibility, more personal responsibility when it comes to battling the obesity epidemic and all the associated diseases. They say that people should exercise more and they should have more self-control and make better choices and avoid overeating and reduce their intake of sugar-sweetened drinks and processed foods. We're led to believe that there's no good food or bad food, that it's all a matter of balance. You can have anything as long as you just have a diet that's balanced. And that sounds good in theory, except for one thing. New discoveries in science prove that industrial, processed, sugar, fat, and salt-laden food that is made in a plant rather than grown in a plant, as Michael Pollan would say, is biologically addictive. Imagine a foot-high pile of broccoli or a giant bowl of apple slices. Now, do you know anyone who would binge on broccoli or apples? On the other hand, imagine a mountain of potato chips or a whole bag of cookies or a pint of ice cream. Those are easy to imagine vanishing like that in an unconscious reptilian brain-eating frenzy. Now, broccoli is not addictive, but cookies, chips, and soda absolutely can become addictive drugs. The just say no approach to drug addiction hasn't really fared too well. It won't work for our industrial food addiction either. Tell a cocaine or a heroin addict or an alcoholic to just say no after that first snort or shot or drink. It's not that simple. Now, there are specific biological mechanisms that drive addictive behavior. We understand those. Nobody chooses to be a heroin addict, a cokehead, or a drunk. Nobody chooses to be fat either. The behaviors arise out of primitive neurochemical reward centers in the brain that override our normal willpower and overwhelm our ordinary biological signals that control our hunger. So consider this. Why do cigarette smokers continue to smoke even though they know that smoking will give them cancer and heart disease? Why do less than 20% of alcoholics successfully quit drinking? Why do most addicts continue to use cocaine and heroin despite their lives being completely destroyed? Why does quitting caffeine lead to irritability and headaches? It's because these substances are biologically addictive. Now, why is it so hard for obese people to lose weight despite the social stigma and the health consequences like high blood pressure and diabetes and heart disease and arthritis and even cancer, even though they have an intense desire to lose weight? It's not because they want to be fat, it's because certain types of foods are addictive. Food made of sugar and fat and salt can be addictive, especially when combined in secret ways that the food industry will not share or make public. We are biologically wired to crave these foods and eat as much of them as possible. We all know about cravings. But what does the science tell us about food addiction? What are the legal and policy implications if certain food is in fact addictive? Now, let's examine the research and the similarities between high sugar, energy-dense, fatty and salty processed and junk foods on the one hand and cocaine, heroin, and nicotine addiction on the other hand. We're going to start by reviewing the diagnostic criteria for addiction from the psychiatric Bible called DSM-4, and we're looking at how that compares to food addiction. So here's what we know. People who are addicted use a substance in larger amounts and take it for longer periods than other normal people. This is a classic symptom in people who habitually overeat. Also, addicts have a persistent desire or repeatedly have unsuccessful attempts to quit. Now consider how many people try to lose weight and fail over and over again. Also, people spend lots of activity and time thinking about how to get or use or maybe even recover from their addictive substance, like those who continue to try to lose weight over and over and constantly are worrying about food. Also, people continue to use these substances even though they have important social and occupational or recreational activities that are impaired or they have to give up. They get fired from their job, they lose their spouse, or whatever happens, or they can't do what they like to do. And this also happens in many people who are overweight. Also, people continue to use the substance despite knowing how bad it is for them. And this happens all the time when people who are overweight and sick. People have diabetes and heart attacks, and they still keep on eating in this way because they're eating addictive foods. Also, there's something called tolerance, which is a marked increase in the amount and a decrease in the effect. So in other words, you have to eat more and you get less benefit from the junk food you're eating, so you have to eat more and more and more. So it's like an addict or an alcoholic needs more and more of the substance to help them. So this is really classic in food addiction as well. Also, the other thing that happens, and this is really important, there's classic withdrawal symptoms. So if you're using heroin or cocaine or nicotine and you stop using it, you get physical withdrawal symptoms. The same thing happens when people undergo what we call a healing crisis, when people stop eating junk food and sugars and processed foods. So these are all common symptoms that occur or features that occur in addiction, and then the same features that occur in food addiction. Now, few of us are free from this addictive pattern. If you examine your own behavior in relationship to sugar in particular, you'll likely find that your behavior around sugar and the biological effects of the overconsumption of sugar actually match up perfectly to these traits. Now, many of you have these criteria that apply to you. Now, some of us in small ways or some of us in little ways. I mean, I just have a quick story. I don't really eat too much sugar, but one day I was feeling bad for myself. I was in an airport late for a plane, kind of was going to be very late getting home, and I looked up and I saw a Cinnabon stand. Well, guess what? I went for that Cinnabon, and the rest of the day I felt like an addict. All I could think about was where was I going to get my next fix. So I got off the plane in Chicago and I ran to Starbucks and I got the chocolate covered cherries and I ate them, and all I could do was think about sugar all day. It was like I was an addict. So this happens even in people who don't have serious metabolic problems, and in those who have these serious metabolic problems like obesity, it's 10 times worse. Now, researchers from Yale, and Dr. Kelly Brownell is a friend of mine, but he's at the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity. He created this food addiction scale. And here's a few of the points on the scale that are used to determine if you have a food addiction. So these are questions you can ask yourself. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Just think about it as we go through this. If it does, you may be an industrial food addict. Now, here's the questions. I find that when I start eating certain foods, I end up eating much more than I plan to. Or not eating certain types of foods or cutting down on certain types of foods is something I worry about. I think about it a lot. Or I spend a lot of time feeling sluggish or lethargic from overeating. Or there have been times when I consume certain foods so often and in such large amounts that I spent time dealing with negative feelings about myself from overeating instead of working or spending time with my family or friends or engaging in something else that I like to do. I kept consuming more of the same type of foods or the same amount of food, even though I was having emotional or physical problems. So I kept, eating all these bad foods, even though I was getting sicker and sicker. Or here's another question. Over time, I found that I need to eat more and more of the food to get the feeling I want, which is to feel a little better for a short period of time. Like maybe I need more of that sugar to get rid of the negative emotions that I have, or to feel feeling depressed, or having a little more pleasure. Also, I have withdrawal symptoms when I cut down or stop eating certain foods. So don't include withdrawal symptoms like from caffeine or instant soda and so forth, but mostly just from sugar and other foods. For example, do you get feelings of being anxious or agitated or irritable or cravings or just feeling kind of nutty if you don't get your fix? Also, here's another question you might ask yourself. My behavior with respect to food and eating causes me significant distress. Like it bothers me, it hurts my life, it makes me upset. Or I experience significant problems in my ability to function effectively. I can't do my daily routine. It's hard for me to work or concentrate at school, or I can't do my normal social activities. I don't want to go out and do stuff. I can't be engaged with my family, or I get health problems because of food and eating. Based on these criteria and others that Dr. Kelly Brownell uses, many of us, including the most obese of us and the children, are addicted to industrial food. Now, here are some of the scientific findings confirming that food can be addictive. So what we talked about were the behavioral criteria, what you feel and what you experience and so forth. But let's talk about some of the science behind what we know happens in the brain when you eat these industrial processed foods. First, we know that sugar stimulates, and it gets a little scientific here, but it's worth going through this, so I want you to understand it. Sugar stimulates the brain's reward centers. That's what makes you feel pleasure. So it does it through a neurotransmitter called dopamine, exactly like other addictive drugs, like cocaine. When you take a snort of cocaine, you stimulate dopamine, and the same thing happens when you have sugar. When they did brain imaging studies, we call PET scans, they showed that high sugar and high fat foods work just like heroin or opium or morphine in the brain. They also did other brain imaging scans that showed that overweight people and drug addicts have lower levels of these dopamine receptors in their brain, making them want more of these substances that boost dopamine. So they crave cocaine or sugar or whatever it is. Also, the scientists found that foods high in fats and sweets stimulate the release of your body's own opioids. So you get chemicals like morphine. So what happens here is that you eat sugar and it's like getting a little shot of heroin or a little snort of cocaine. It gives you a boost, and that's why we keep going back to it. And then we crash, and then we need more. Then we crash, then we need more. This is a vicious cycle. Drugs, this is very interesting to me. Drugs that we use to block the brain's receptors for heroin and morphine, which is what like we call naltrexone. We use it in the ER if someone comes in with a heroin overdose. We don't want to block the effects. They also reduce the consumption and the preference for sweet, high-fat foods in normal weight and obese bingers. What does that mean? That means that if you take a drug that blocks the effect of heroin, it actually blocks the effect of the sugar cravings as well. Very interesting. People and rats also develop a tolerance to sugar. They need more and more of the substance to satisfy themselves, just like people do or who have heroin or alcohol addiction. Obese people also tend to eat large amounts of unhealthy foods despite the severe social consequences, just like addicts. And also humans and animals experience withdrawal when suddenly cut off from sugar, just like addicts detoxifying like drugs. Just like drugs, after an initial period of enjoyment, the food user no longer really uses the food to get high, but just to feel normal. Now remember the movie Supersize Me, where Morgan Spurlock ate 3 supersized meals from McDonald's every day for a month? What struck me about that film was not that he gained 30 pounds or his cholesterol went up or even that he got a fatty liver. What really surprised me was the portrait it painted of the addictive quality of the food he ate. See, at the beginning of the movie, when he ate his first supersized meal, he threw it up. It made him sick, just like a teenager who drinks too much alcohol at his first party and throws up. By the end of the movie, he only felt well when he ate that junk food. The rest of the time he felt depressed, exhausted, anxious, irritable, and he lost his sex drive, just like an addict or a smoker withdrawing from his drug. The food was clearly addictive. Now, the problems with food addiction are compounded by the fact that food manufacturers refuse to release any internal data on how they put the ingredients together to maximize the consumption of their food products, despite requests from the researchers like the Institute of Medicine. In his book, The End of Overeating, David Kessler, who is the former head of the Food and Drug Administration, describes the science of how food is made into drugs by the creation of what he calls hyper-palatable foods that lead to neurochemical addiction. And this binging leads to profound psychological consequences and physiological consequences that drive up our calorie consumption and lead to weight gain. In a Harvard study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, now hear this is incredible. Overweight teenagers consumed an extra 500 calories a day when they were allowed to eat junk food compared to the days when they weren't allowed to eat junk food. They ate more because that junk food triggered cravings and addiction. Like an alcoholic after the first drink. Once these kids started eating processed foods full of sugar, fat, and salt that triggered their brain's reward centers, they couldn't stop. They were like rats in a cage. So stop and think about this for a minute. If you were to eat 500 more calories a day, that would equal about 182,500 calories a year. Let's see, if you have about 3,500 calories in a pound, that means you might gain up to 52 pounds of weight in a year. So if high sugar, high fat, calorie-rich, nutrient-poor, processed, fast junk food is indeed addictive, what does that mean for us? How should that influence our approach to obesity? What are the implications it has for government policies and regulation? Are there legal implications if we're being food pushers and pushing addictive foods on our children? If we're allowing and even promoting addictive substances in our children's diets, how should we handle that? Now, I assure you, big food isn't going to make any changes voluntarily. They'd rather ignore this science. And here's what they say. They have 3 mantras about food to get us distracted from this research and what we really know. First, they tell us it's all about choice. All you have to do is choose what you eat, and it's all about personal responsibility. And they say that government regulation regarding what you eat and how we market foods is going to lead to a nanny state and food fascists and interference with our civil liberties. So they kind of frighten us into not wanting to control this food addictive marketing that goes on. Also, they say there's no good foods and bad foods. Let me tell you, a whole box of cookies or potato chips is different than a whole bag of carrots or apple slices or broccoli, right? There are differences in foods, and there are some good and bad foods. If we're eating high fructose corn syrup and trans fats and processed food and high salt foods, it's not just about, all foods being equal and just about choice. So we really need to sort of refocus on what is the problem. Also, they focus really on education about exercise, so they deflect any attention to diet. They say, as long as you burn those calories, it doesn't matter what you eat. But let me tell you, it takes a lot of walking and a lot of miles to burn off French fries, a cheeseburger, and a Coke. Unfortunately, this is really little more than propaganda from an industry interested in profit, not in nourishing our nation or solving our problems. So do we really have a choice about what we eat? The biggest sham in the food industry, in their strategy and government food policy, is advocating and emphasizing that it's all about individual choice and personal responsibility to solve our obesity and chronic disease epidemic. They're saying it's all your fault, you fix it. We'll tell you how, but you have to fix it. We're told that if people would just eat healthy and they exercise more and they took better care of themselves, we would all be fine. We wouldn't need to change our policies or our environment. We don't want the government telling us what to do. We want free choice. But you have to ask yourself, are your choices free, or is big food driving behavior through insidious marketing techniques? The reality is that many people live in food deserts where they can't buy an apple or a carrot, or live in communities that have no sidewalks or where it's unsafe to be out walking. We blame the fat person, but how can we blame a 2-year-old for being fat? How much choice do they have? We live in a toxic food environment, a nutritional wasteland. School lunchrooms and vending machines overflow with junk food and sports drinks that are really just sugar in another packaging. Most of us don't even know what we're eating. 50% of meals are eaten outside the home, and most of the home-cooked meals are simply microwaved industrial food. Restaurants and chains provide no clear menu labeling. Did you know that a single order of Outback Steakhouse cheese fries is 2,900 calories? Or that a Starbucks venti mocha latte is 508 calories? That's like a quarter of your daily requirements of food. Environmental factors like advertising, lack of menu labeling, and others, and the addictive properties of industrial food, when all added together, override our normal biological and psychological control mechanisms. We can't fight our biology. We can't overcome it with our intention or our will. It's not about willpower. So to pretend changing this is beyond the scope of government responsibility, or that creating policy to help manage such environmental factors would lead to a nanny state is simply an excuse for big food to continue their unethical practices. Now, here are some ways we actually can change our food environment. It's practical and solutions. First, we can build the real cost of industrial food into the price. See, and that price includes the cost of our healthcare costs related to eating these foods and lost productivity. We also should subsidize the production of fruits and vegetables. 80% of the government subsidies presently go to soybean oil that's made into trans fats and processed oils, and corn, which is used to make high fructose corn syrup that's the ingredients of most of the junk food we consume. So actually, the government is supporting the production of most of the junk food out there. We need to rethink these subsidies and provide for more better subsidies for smaller farmers and broader arrays of fruits and vegetable subsidies. And we need to incentivize supermarkets, and we need to help them open in poor communities so that people who are poor can access these foods. We also know that poverty and obesity go hand in hand. One reason is the food deserts that we see all around the nation. Poor people have a right to high quality food too. We need to create ways to provide healthy food to them in their communities. We have to also end food marketing to children. 50 other countries worldwide have banned food marketing to kids. Why haven't we? We also have to change the school lunchroom. The National School Lunch Program in its present form is a travesty. Unless we want the next generation to be fatter and sicker than we are, we need better nutrition education and better foods in our schools. I think we also need to teach cooking skills in our schools. Most people in America today don't even know how to cook. We also need to build community programs with a new workforce of community health workers. These people can be able to help provide support to individuals making better food choices. And we need to get together to get healthy, to join in groups around the country to support each other in making healthier lifestyle choices. We can alter the default conditions in the environment that foster and promote addictive behavior. It's simply a matter of public and political will. If we don't, we're going to face an ongoing epidemic of obesity and illness across the nation and across the globe. So for those with personal struggles with food addiction, remember, this is not a moral failing or a lack of willpower. Here are my 5 suggestions that I offer my patients to help them break their food addictions. First, balance your blood sugar. Research studies show that blood sugar swings actually lead to lower overall blood flow to the brain, which means bad decisions. So keep your blood sugar stable. And here's how you do it. You have to eat a nutritious breakfast. We have to eat breakfast, and it has to have some protein in it, with eggs or a protein shake or nut butter, something with protein that helps balance your sugar, because studies show that eating a healthy breakfast helps people maintain and sustain weight loss and helps control appetite. Also, have smaller, more frequent meals. Eat every 3 or 4 hours and have some protein snack between meals, and have some protein and fats with meals. This helps balance your blood sugar. This is called lowering the glycemic load, and this is very important. You can do this with protein, nuts, seeds, beans. Also, you should avoid eating for about 2 to 3 hours before you go to sleep, because it helps balance your sugar over the night. Also, you need to eliminate sugar, and this is the hard part. Really, it's like giving up an addiction. You have to eliminate sugar and artificial sweeteners, and your cravings will go away. I promise you they'll go away quickly, but you have to do it in the right way. You have to eat these small, frequent meals. You have to eat breakfast. You have to have protein with each meal, and you should just go cold turkey. Get rid of refined sugars, sodas, fruit juices, artificial sweeteners. Get rid of all of them from your diet, and these are going to trigger cravings if you start to eat them again. Next, also determine if hidden food allergies are actually triggering your cravings. This is a little bit of a longer discussion. We're going to talk about this in future sessions, but hidden food allergies or sensitivities can trigger cravings. We often crave the very foods that we have a hidden allergy for. For example, if you're eating wheat or dairy and you're craving bread and cheese, you may just be addicted to these things and you need to stop them. So I would consider trying things like the Ultra Simple Diet or the Ultra Simple Diet Challenge, a home study coaching program. These things help you to reset your level of inflammation in your body, to stop food allergens, and to really help you see, in fact, if this is contributing to your ill effects of your health or not. Also, get enough sleep. You know, research shows that if you don't sleep enough, you crave more food and you crave more carbs and sugar. And lastly, you should optimize your nutritional status. And the way I do this obviously is diet, but there's certain key supplements you need. You need vitamin D. And studies have shown that low vitamin D levels affect hormones that regulate appetite. So it's really important. Also, you need to optimize omega-3 levels, and low levels actually of omega-3 have been associated with obesity and diabetes and sugar problems, as well as all sorts of other bad things. Also, there are certain supplements that can help cut cravings, things like glutamine and 5-HTP and tyrosine. These are all amino acids that help reduce cravings. Also, stress is a bad thing too, and that's hard to manage sometimes, but learning how to manage stress and using stress-reducing herbs can help, like rhodiola. Also, certain vitamins and minerals like chromium helps balance blood sugar, and fiber is another trick. I use a lot of fiber with my patients, particularly something called glucomannan, which is a super fiber that helps reduce all those sugar spikes and insulin. So it's very possible, by paying attention to a few simple principles which I've outlined, and by working with your community and within your society, to actually help break this cycle of food addiction that's making our children sick and fat and killing us all sooner than we like. Thank you.